The broken tin cup's jagged edge sliced deeper into Josie's palm as she gripped it tighter, sending sharp pain shooting up her arm like fire racing through her veins. The 7-year-old girl's whole body trembled as she stood between her 5-year-old sister Ruth and the pack of wolves that prowled closer through the dried grass that rustled and crackled under their razor-sharp claws with each calculated step. Behind her, Ruth's sobs echoed across the empty prairie as she curled against their broken wagon wheel. "My belly hurts like someone's cutting me with a knife chioi." The little girl whimpered, doubled over with hunger pangs that twisted her insides like a living thing. She pressed her small face against the splintered wood, remembering how their mother used to tell her stories about brave princesses who fought dragons before the fever took hold and left her too weak to speak. "I want Mama to make the hurt go away and tell me about the princess again." Josie's mind raced with bittersweet memories of playing hide-and-seek with Ruth in their old barn back home, of hearing her sister's delighted giggles echoing from behind the grain sacks as they played their favorite game. The thought of losing Ruth, too, of being completely alone in this vast, hostile world, made her clutch the tin cup so hard that fresh blood ran down her wrist, mixing with the dirt and sweat that covered her small hands. "Stay away from my sister!" she shouted at the wolves, though her voice cracked with exhaustion and terror. "Don't come any closer, or I'll fight you." The pack leader's lips curled back, revealing teeth stained with old blood and bits of previous kills. Its yellow eyes gleamed with predatory hunger as it studied the two small figures, calculating the distance and effort required to claim such easy prey. The prairie wind carried the stench of death from their mother's body, lying motionless beneath a moth-eaten coat, drawing scavengers from miles around who had caught the scent of decay. The largest wolf, its ribs clearly visible through mangy fur that spoke of a hard summer on the drought-stricken plains, took another deliberate step forward. Behind it, the rest of the pack spread out in a practiced hunting formation, cutting off any possible escape route. Their coordination spoke of desperate hunger and the ruthless efficiency of predators who had learned to work together to survive. Ruth's terrified sobs grew louder as the beasts closed in. "Josie, I'm so scared I don't want the bad wolves to eat us like they ate the rabbits." "They won't touch you," Josie whispered fiercely, though she knew it was likely a lie. The tin cup felt pathetically small and useless in her bleeding hand, but it was all she had. Their father, a Lakota warrior, their mother had secretly married in a distant territory where such unions were less scrutinized, had been gunned down by a settler patrol near Fort Robinson 4 months ago, leaving them defenseless on this cursed journey to reach what they desperately hoped would be sanctuary with their mother's family. The wolf crouched lower, its powerful muscles bunching under its scarred hide as it prepared to spring. Ruth screamed at the top of her lungs, the sound piercing the evening air like a knife. A rifle shot cracked across the prairie like a thunderclap, echoing off the distant hills. The lead wolf collapsed instantly, dark blood spreading beneath its still form and soaking into the thirsty earth. The remaining pack members scattered with high-pitched yelps of fear and confusion, their predatory courage shattered by the sudden violent death of their leader. Josie whirled around her heart, hammering so violently against her ribs that she thought it might burst from her chest. Through the settling dust and gun smoke emerged an elderly Lakota warrior, his deeply weathered face bearing the permanent scars of countless battles fought over decades of warfare. Gray streaked his long black hair, which was tied back with strips of worn leather and decorated with small feathers that spoke of honors earned in combat. The warrior limped heavily on his right leg, each step drawing a barely suppressed wince from an old bullet wound that had never properly healed. His clothes were a practical mixture of traditional leather and traded cloth, patched and mended countless times, but still serviceable. Most remarkably, his dark eyes held no malice or threat, only profound sadness and understanding as he surveyed the tragic scene before him. He stopped 40 feet away and slowly, deliberately lowered his rifle, showing his weathered hands to prove he posed no immediate danger. His gaze moved from the frightened girls to the covered body by the wagon, and his expression filled with the kind of deep sorrow that comes from witnessing too much death and suffering. "Little ones badly hurt," he said in halting but careful English, his voice rough as winter winds scraping across dried grass. He gestured toward Josie's bleeding palm with genuine concern. "Need much help? Need food, water, safe place?" Josie stepped backward, instinctively pulling Ruth with her, despite the burning pain that shot through her cut hand with every movement. Her mother's whispered warnings filled her mind, stories of raids and kidnappings, of the ongoing tensions between settlers and native tribes that had shaped her understanding of the dangerous world beyond their small farm. But Ruth, driven by hunger that gnawed at her empty stomach, like a living parasite, broke free from her sister's protective grasp and stumbled toward the stranger. "Ruth, don't go to him," Josie called out desperately, but the little girl was already reaching with trembling hands toward the strips of dried meat the warrior had produced from his worn leather pouch. The warrior, who would later tell them his name was Wicasa Gray Bear, knelt carefully on his good leg, his wounded one making him grunt with obvious pain. He watched with infinite patience as Ruth grabbed the jerky with both small hands, tearing at the tough meat with desperate hunger, while tears of relief streamed down her dirt-stained cheeks. She very hungry for long time. Wicasa observed his broken English, carrying deep compassion and understanding. "You both need much food, much water, much care. How long since you eat real meal?" Dark clouds gathered overhead, like a thick woolen blanket, and distant thunder rolled across the endless grassland with ominous promise. The warrior looked up at the threatening sky with the practiced eye of someone who had spent his entire life reading weather patterns, then back at the girls with growing concern etched deeply in his scarred features. "A very big storm comes soon," he said, pointing at the approaching weather with one gnarled finger that bore the scars of old fights. "Much lightning, heavy rain, strong wind. Wolves come back when storm pass, hungrier than before and angry about dead pack leader." He gestured toward a line of cottonwood trees and rocky outcroppings about 3/4 of a mile away, where the terrain offered natural shelter from the elements. "Safe place there. Good cave dry ground protection from wind and rain. Storm cannot hurt us there." Josie looked at Ruth, who already had more color returning to her pale cheeks as she devoured the life-giving meat with ravenous appetite. The wind was picking up noticeably, carrying the scent of approaching rain, and the distant howls of the scattered wolf pack already beginning to regroup somewhere in the gathering darkness. "We don't know you," Josie said, trying to inject strength and authority into her voice, while cradling her bleeding hand protectively against her chest. "Our mama always told us not to trust strangers, especially people who might want to hurt us." Wicasa's expression grew even more sorrowful, and he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Lost my own granddaughter once. Her name was Winona. Same age as you, same brave heart trying to protect younger ones." He touched his chest where his heart beat with obvious emotion. "White man's sickness come to our camp like fire through dry grass. Take her, take all my family. Heart broken like old pottery dropped on stones." He stood slowly and carefully, using his rifle as a support to favor his wounded leg. "But maybe Great Spirit give old man chance to save other children. Maybe heal some deep pain in here." He tapped his chest again, then muttered quietly to himself in his native tongue, before translating with obvious effort. "Winona, little one, grandfather, could not save you from the spotted death, but will save these two with everything he has left. Will not let more children die alone and afraid." The first heavy raindrops began to fall, hitting the parched earth with sounds like pebbles dropping into a still pond. As Josie hesitated, torn between fear and desperate need, Wicasa spoke more firmly. "Come now. Storm not wait for us to make decision. Children die in big storm without shelter." Thunder crashed overhead with increasing violence as Josie made her choice and grabbed Ruth's sticky hand. They followed the limping warrior across the prairie, their feet struggling against the increasingly treacherous ground as the rain came down harder with each passing moment. The dusty earth quickly transformed into slippery, clinging mud that made every step an effort and sucked at their worn boots. Ruth stumbled twice, her short legs struggling to keep up with the adult's pace, before Wicasa gently lifted her onto his back, despite the obvious pain it caused his wounded leg. He carried her carefully, one arm wrapped securely around her small body, while using his rifle as a walking stick with the other hand. "Now hold tight, little one," he told Ruth as they made their way through the increasingly violent storm. Not far now to warm, dry place. They reached the tree line just as the storm unleashed its full fury upon the prairie. Torrential rain hammered down from the black sky, transforming the previously parched earth into a treacherous bog that made their feet slip and slide with every step. Lightning split the sky in brilliant blue-white flashes, followed immediately by thunder so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Wicasa led them through the dense grove of cottonwoods to a narrow cave opening carved into the rocky hillside by centuries of wind and water. The entrance was partially concealed by thick vines and overgrown brush, making it nearly invisible to casual observation, clearly a shelter that had been used by travelers for generations. Inside, the cave proved to be surprisingly spacious, with a sandy floor that had been worn smooth by countless occupants over the years. Blackened stones, arranged in careful circles, spoke of many fires built for warmth and cooking, while ancient smoke stains on the walls told wordless stories of countless nights when travelers had sought refuge from prairie storms. While the girls huddled together in their soaked clothes, shivering uncontrollably from both cold and residual fear, Wicasa built a fire with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times before. He used dry wood he kept stored in the cave's depths, along with tinder and kindling that he produced from a waterproof pouch. The flames quickly caught and spread, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls and filling the enclosed space with blessed warmth that slowly drove away the chill that had settled deep in their bones. "On a let old man see hurt hand," Wicasa said, gently approaching Josie with strips of clean cloth torn from his spare shirt. He examined the deep cut with the careful attention of someone who had treated many wounds over the years, his weathered fingers surprisingly gentle as he probed the injury. "Cut very deep, go to bone. Need clean watertight binding to stop bleeding and prevent bad spirits from entering wound." He used precious drinking water from his leather pouch to wash away the blood and accumulated dirt, then wrapped her palm with careful, methodical movements that spoke of long experience with battlefield injuries. "Will heal good if keep clean and dry," he assured her, "but must be careful not to open again." From his pack, Wicasa produced what seemed like a feast compared to their recent starvation diet: strips of dried venison, parched corn, wild berries, preserved in rendered fat, and even some honey stored in a small clay pot. As the girls ate with desperate hunger, making small sounds of pleasure at the taste of real food, he sat apart near the fire, quietly carving something from a piece of seasoned wood with a bone-handled knife. "What are you making?" Ruth asked between bites, her voice already noticeably stronger now that she had food in her stomach. "Buffalo for strength," Wicasa replied, holding up the small wooden figure that was taking shape under his skilled hands. "Make eagle too, for freedom to fly high above troubles. Both for you, so you remember old man who help when you need remember to be strong." Outside their shelter, the storm raged with what seemed like biblical fury. Wind howled through the cottonwood trees with a sound like banshees wailing, and they could hear massive branches cracking and falling like gunshots in the distance. Lightning illuminated the cave entrance in stark, momentary flashes of blue-white light, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth beneath them. Suddenly, with a sound like the world splitting apart, an enormous tree, a cottonwood that had stood sentinel for perhaps 70 years, crashed down directly across their cave entrance. Its massive trunk completely blocked their exit, trapping them inside with only thin gaps between the bark and stone that let in slivers of the storm's continuing fury. We trapped until storm passed completely. Wicasa said with the calm acceptance of someone who had faced far worse situations in his long life. Move tree when wind stop, rain finish. No choice but wait. But the storm outside was not their greatest concern. Over the howling wind and crashing thunder, they heard a new sound that made Wicasa's blood run cold, the thunder of multiple horses moving through the storm and men's voices shouting through the rain and wind. Tracks disappear somewhere around here. A voice called out, barely audible over the storm's fury. That murdering savage has to be hiding close by, probably waiting for us to give up and go home. He's got to be somewhere near those trees. Another voice replied with obvious frustration. Nobody could survive out in the open in this weather. When we find him, we'll make him pay proper for killing Henderson's prize bull. Wicasa immediately moved to smother the fire with handfuls of sand from the cave floor, plunging them into complete darkness. He moved swiftly but silently to position himself between the girls and the blocked entrance, his rifle ready, despite the confined space that would make fighting difficult. I'm very quiet now, he whispered urgently, his voice barely audible even to them. Men hunt wrong person, think old man, steal cattle and kill animals. They angry, scared think with hearts full of hate instead of heads full of sense. Through the narrow gaps around the fallen tree, they could see lantern light dancing in the rain, like evil spirits casting eerie shadows that moved and shifted with each gust of wind. A group of mounted men had taken shelter among the trees, their voices carrying over the storm as they planned their deadly search with growing frustration. That Bill take Jim and 2 others check that cave over there, the leader commanded with military precision. Rest of you spread out in a line and sweep through these trees. That red devil's got to be somewhere close, and we're not going home empty-handed. Footsteps approached their hiding place, boots squelching and splashing in the mud with each step. Josie held Ruth so tightly, she could feel the little girl's heart racing against her chest like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. The sound of their breathing seemed impossibly loud in the confined space, and she was terrified that the men outside would hear them. A man's bearded face appeared at the blocked entrance, holding a lantern high while peering into the darkness with narrowed, suspicious eyes. Bill, a lean man with a scraggly beard and the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, studied the cave interior for what felt like an eternity, while his companion kept a pistol trained on the opening. "See anything in there?" the gunman asked impatiently, rain dripping from his hat brim as he tried to get a better angle. "Just old animal sign and some charcoal from previous fires," Bill replied after a thorough examination that seemed to last forever. "Trail's completely washed out in this rain anyway. Could be anywhere by now." "Let's keep moving then," the gunman said with obvious frustration. "He's out there somewhere, and we're going to find him if it takes all night." The footsteps retreated slowly, but the voices continued as the men argued about their search strategy and debated whether to wait out the storm or continue hunting in the dangerous weather. Josie's heart hammered so hard against her ribs that she was certain the sound would give them away. "Wargyak, why are they hunting you?" she whispered once the immediate danger had passed and the sounds of the search had moved further away. Wicasa stared into the absolute darkness, his voice heavy with the weight of old pain and injustice. "Someone kill farmer's cattle, steal prize bull worth much money. White men think all Lakota same person. See one Indian, blame all Indians for every bad thing that happened. But you didn't do it," Ruth said with the simple, clear logic of childhood. "No, little one. But angry men not listen to truth when fear fill their hearts. They see red skin, think guilty before even hear words. Some white men do bad things, but no one blame all white men for what few do. But when Indian do bad thing, all Indians must pay price. That's not fair at all." Josie protested, though she was beginning to understand that the world was far more complicated and dangerous than her mother had ever explained to her. "World not fair to anyone, little one." Wicasa replied with deep sadness. "Red people suffer from white man's laws. White people suffer from red man's anger. All people suffer when fear and hate grow stronger than love and understanding. But still must try to do right thing, help others, when can protect children who need protecting." As they waited for the storm to pass and the search to move on, Wicasa began to share his story in the darkness, his voice growing soft and distant when he spoke of his past. He mixed English with Lakota words when powerful emotions overwhelmed his limited vocabulary in the white man's language, then patiently translated for the girls who hung on every word, who had beautiful wife once long time ago. He said quietly, his voice filled with love and loss. "She make our lodge bright as summer morning, fill every day with laughter like water running over stones. Together we have one daughter, most beautiful girl in all the world, with eyes like stars and voice like singing bird." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Daughter, grow up. Marry brave young warrior from good family. Together they give me 2 granddaughters, little ones, who bring joy back to old man's heart after too many years of war and death." "What were their names?" Ruth asked softly, sensing the importance of the story he was telling. "Wife called Morning Star because she wake before dawn to make fire and cook food. Daughter called Singing Bird because she always have song in her heart, even in darkest times. Little granddaughters were Winona and Ayanna." His voice broke slightly with emotion. "Winona mean firstborn daughter. Ayanna mean eternal blossom that never fade." Tears ran down his weathered cheeks as he continued. "They love to pick wildflowers in spring, make crowns for their hair, laugh, and play games like you two do. Winona brave like you, always protect little sister. Ayanna gentle like Ruth, trust everyone, see good in all people." "What happened to them?" Josie asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "White man's sickness come to our camp like fire through dry grass." Wicasa said, his voice growing heavy with grief. "Smallpox, they call it. Kills fast, kills everyone it touch. Take my beloved wife first, then our daughter who try to care for sick people, then little granddaughters who too small to fight such strong sickness." He was quiet for a long moment, lost in painful memories. All gone in one season like flowers cut by early frost. Left old man alone with nothing but pain and anger in heart. "What did you do?" Ruth asked in a whisper. "I went little crazy for a while," Wicasa admitted. "Wanted to fight all white people, make them pay for bringing death to our people. Join war parties, attack wagons, hurt innocent people because pain and heart too big to carry alone." "But you're not like that now," Josie observed. "No, little one. Fighting only bring more death, more pain, more children left without families. So I choose different path. Now I travel alone, help where I can protect children who need protecting, try to honor memory of family by doing good instead of evil." He muttered something in Lakota, then translated, "When I see you with wolves, I see my granddaughters in danger. Cannot let more children die alone and afraid. Great Spirit maybe give old man chance to save lives, instead of take them heal some pain and broken heart." By dawn, the storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving the prairie washed clean and sparkling in the early sunlight that filtered through the dissipating clouds. The air smelled of rain and new growth, and birds had emerged from their hiding places to sing in the aftermath of the tempest. Working together with considerable effort, they managed to roll the fallen tree enough to create a gap just wide enough for them to squeeze through one at a time. Wicasa shouldered his pack and checked his rifle carefully, while the girls gathered their few remaining possessions. "My leg very stiff from storm and sleeping on cold ground." He admitted, limping more noticeably than before, as they prepared to leave their shelter. "But we must move soon. Those men will come back when sun up and they can see tracks again." Where do we go now? Ruth asked, taking his weathered hand in her small one with complete trust. My people have camped 4 days north along river. Wicasa replied, looking in that direction with longing. Very safe there. Much food, warm lodge other children to play with elders, to tell stories and teach old ways. But Josie shook her head with firm determination. We can't go there. We have to reach Millfield. Uncle Walter is waiting for us there. Mama promised he would take care of us and give us a real home. Wicasa studied her face carefully, seeing the desperate hope that kept her going, despite everything they had endured. White people not always welcome children with Indian blood, little one. Your father was Lakota warrior. Some people see that as very bad thing that make you different and dangerous. We're not Indian. Josie protested, though uncertainty was beginning to creep into her voice like poison. We're white. Mama was white, and we look like her mostly. Blood is blood, little one. Some people care more about who your father was than who you are in your heart. But maybe your Uncle Walter different from most. Maybe he good man with open heart who see children need help. Josie needed desperately to believe in her mother's promise, needed to cling to the hope of a normal life with family who would love and protect them as her parents had. Please, we have to try. Mama said Uncle Walter has a big farm with lots of animals and would be so happy to see us. Wicasa nodded slowly, understanding her desperate need for hope and family. We try your way first, little one. If Uncle Walter good man with kind heart, he take care of you proper. If not, we find other way. Always other way for people who not give up. They set off across the prairie, following the partially washed-out wagon ruts that still pointed toward the distant settlement of Millfield. The morning sun climbed higher in the clear sky, turning the wet grass into a steaming carpet that soaked their feet and made walking difficult on the muddy ground. After about an hour of steady walking, they reached a small rocky hill that offered both a good vantage point and a place to rest. Wicasa's leg was bothering him more than he wanted to admit, and a low fever from his infected wound was beginning to make him weak and dizzy. I need to rest for a few minutes, he said, sitting heavily on a sun-warmed boulder. Old wounds hurt more when weather change. As they rested and shared water from his pouch, Wicasa noticed something in the muddy ground around the base of the hill that made his blood run cold. Look here, he said, pointing to clear impressions in the rain-softened earth. Fresh horse tracks. Heavy rider horse favor right front hoof. Someone follow us, watch us. Josie looked at the hoof prints, which were clearly visible and recent. What does that mean? Someone track us since yesterday, maybe longer. Watch from distance, wait for right time to act. These tracks from after storm may be 1 hour old. They found more disturbing evidence among the rocks as they explored their resting place. The cold remains of a small fire, scraps of food that had been hastily abandoned, and most troubling of all, a piece of paper that had been partially burned but not completely destroyed by the rain. Wicasa carefully unfolded the water-stained document, revealing fragments of words written in a woman's careful handwriting. The ink had run in places, but enough remained to be legible. Can you read this? He asked Josie, holding the paper where she could see it clearly. She studied the damaged letter, making out fragments of sentences. Walter threatens to hurt the children if anyone learns about. The land is worth too much to. They must never know about their father until they're old enough to. Please help them if something terrible happens to me. It's Mama's handwriting, Josie said with growing alarm and confusion. But who was she writing to? And why would she write about Uncle Walter threatening to hurt us? Before Wicasa could answer, the sound of multiple horses approaching at high speed made them scramble for cover among the rocks. But this time their efforts were futile. A patrol of 8 armed men had spotted them from a distance and was riding hard in their direction with obvious hostile intent. There's that murdering savage. The lead rider shouted, his voice carrying clearly across the prairie. And he's got those missing Morrison children with him. Wicasa grabbed both girls and pulled them toward the backside of the hill. But his injured leg and growing fever slowed them down considerably. The riders were closing fast, and there was nowhere to run on the open prairie without being seen and easily caught. "Stop running, you red devil," another man yelled with obvious anger. "We've got you surrounded now, and there's no place left to hide." A gunshot cracked behind them, the sound echoing off the rocky hills. The bullet struck the stones near Ruth's feet, sending sharp fragments flying in all directions. She cried out in pain as the stone chips cut through her dress and drew blood from her leg. "They're shooting at us." Josie screamed, helping her sister limp toward a shallow ravine that offered the only available cover. More shots followed in rapid succession, the bullets whistling through the air around them with deadly intent. One bullet passed so close to Josie's ear that she felt the heat of its passage and heard the deadly whisper of its flight. Another struck Wicasa in the shoulder, spinning him around and drawing a grunt of pain. But he kept moving despite the blood that immediately began streaming down his arm. They reached the ravine, just as the riders surrounded them, completely dismounting with their rifles ready, and their faces grim with the satisfaction of hunters who had finally cornered their prey. "Finally got you, you murdering bastard." The leader said, a stocky man with a salt and pepper beard and the weathered look of someone who spent his life in the saddle. "You're going to pay for what you did to Henderson's prize bull. Please don't hurt us." Ruth whimpered, clinging to Josie's hand with desperate strength. "We didn't do anything bad to anybody." "We know you didn't, little ones," the leader replied, his voice becoming gentler when he addressed the children. "This savage kidnapped you and has been keeping you prisoner, but you're safe now." "He didn't kidnap us," Josie protested with fierce loyalty. "He saved us from wolves and has been taking care of us. Don't you worry about that child," the man said dismissively. "Children sometimes get confused when they've been scared for a long time. We'll get you back to your family where you belong." Wicasa stepped forward despite his bleeding wound, his voice calm but firm. "Children tell truth. I not kidnap anyone. I help. Their mother die from fever, I find them alone on prairie with wolves ready to kill." "Shut up, redskin," one of the other men snarled with obvious hatred. "We know what you did, and we're not interested in your lies." But one of the riders, a younger man named Tom Bradley, was studying the situation with growing unease and doubt. "Wait a minute, Jim. If he kidnapped them, why aren't they tied up or trying to get away? And why does the little one seem so comfortable with him?" "Because he's been filling their heads with lies and promises," Jim replied without hesitation. "Indians are crafty that way, especially with children who don't know better." Tom dismounted and approached the girls, kneeling down to their level with obvious concern. "Can you tell me exactly what happened? How did you meet this man?" Josie looked at Wicasa, who nodded encouragingly despite his pain. "Our mama died 3 days ago from the fever. We were by our broken wagon, and a whole pack of wolves came to eat us. We were so scared, and I only had a broken tin cup to fight them with. But then he came and shot the biggest wolf and saved us. Then he shared his food and protected us from the big storm." "And what about the bullet wound in his shoulder?" Tom asked, pointing to the fresh blood. "You shot him just now when we were trying to get away," Ruth said accusingly, tears streaming down her face. "He was trying to protect us from you, not hurt us." Tom stood up slowly, his expression increasingly troubled. "Jim, I think we may have made a serious mistake here. This doesn't add up the way we thought it would." "Don't be a fool, Tom," Jim replied with obvious frustration. "You can't trust anything an Indian says, and children this young don't understand what's really happening to them. But the evidence doesn't support our assumptions," Tom insisted with growing conviction. "If he's such a dangerous killer, why would he waste time and energy taking care of sick children? Why didn't he just leave them to die and continue on his way? Because he's planning to sell them to his tribe, another man suggested. Mixed-blood children are valuable as slaves or for ransom. Wicasa's eyes flashed with anger at the suggestion. You know nothing about my people if you think such things. We not take slaves, not hurt children, not sell human beings like cattle. We protect all children, even white children, because children are gifts from Great Spirit. Enough of this nonsense, Jim said, raising his rifle with obvious intent. We're taking these girls back to town where they belong, and you're coming with us to face justice for your crimes. But before anyone could move, the thunder of more horses interrupted the tense standoff. A new group of riders was approaching at full gallop, led by a man in expensive clothes, who rode with the confidence of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. Hold your fire, the newcomer called out as he approached the group. Those are my nieces you're pointing guns at. Jim lowered his rifle slightly, his expression showing surprise and confusion. Walter Morrison, what are you doing way out here? Looking for these children, of course. Walter replied as he dismounted with practiced ease. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s, with a well-groomed beard and clothes that marked him as prosperous and successful. They went missing from our wagon train 4 days ago, and I've been searching everywhere for them. Uncle Walter, Josie cried, running toward him with relief and joy flooding her young face. You came to find us, I knew you would. But Walter's expression was not one of joy or relief at finding his missing nieces. Instead, he looked at them with something that might have been annoyance calculation or even anger carefully controlled. Yes, I came to find you, he said slowly, his voice carrying undertones that made Tom Bradley's instincts prickle with warning. Though, I must say you've caused quite a bit of trouble and expense with your disappearance. We're sorry, Uncle Walter, Ruth said through her tears, not understanding the coldness in his tone. Mama got sick and died, and we didn't know what to do. We were so scared and hungry. Walter's eyes moved to Wicasa with obvious disgust and calculation. And this savage has been holding you captive all this time. No, Josie protested with fierce loyalty. He saved us. He's been taking care of us and protecting us from bad people. Children often become confused and attached to their captors. Walter said dismissively, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something obvious to slow children. It's a well-known phenomenon among people who understand these situations. They don't realize they're being manipulated and used. Tom Bradley stepped forward, his instincts telling him something was very wrong with this entire situation. Mr. Morrison, these children seem genuinely fond of the old man, and they tell a very consistent story about him saving them from wolves. Tom, you're young and inexperienced in these matters, Walter replied with condescending authority. You don't understand the devious and manipulative ways of these people. They're skilled at getting children to trust them, especially children who are frightened and vulnerable. Walter walked closer to Wicasa, studying him with obvious contempt and barely concealed hatred. You made a serious mistake, Savage. You should have left them to die on the prairie where nature intended. Uncle Walter. Josie gasped, shocked by the cruelty of his words. That's a terrible thing to say. He saved our lives. Is it terrible? Walter asked, turning to face her with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let me explain something about your situation, child. Something your mother should have told you, but was too weak and foolish to face. What do you mean? Josie asked, though dread was already settling in her stomach like a cold, heavy stone. Your mother made some very poor choices in her life, Walter said with brutal directness. Choices that have serious consequences for everyone involved, including you. Uncle Walter, you're scaring them, Tom said, his hand moving closer to his weapon. She married a savage. Walter continued, ignoring the protest. Your father was a Lakota warrior. That makes you half-breeds, mixed-blood children who don't belong in civilized society and never will." The words hit Josie like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. She had suspected something was different about their family, but to hear it stated so coldly and with such obvious disgust was more than her young mind could process. "Well, that's exactly why I left you on the prairie to begin with." Walter continued matter-of-factly, his voice showing no emotion whatsoever. "I couldn't possibly bring half-breed children to Millfield. The town would never accept you, and having you around would completely destroy my reputation and all my business prospects. You left us to die." Josie whispered the terrible truth, finally crashing down on her like a physical blow. "I left you to the natural order of things," Walter corrected coldly. "If you had died quietly from exposure or wild animals, it would have been tragic but perfectly explainable. But this old savage complicated everything by keeping you alive." Tom Bradley's face had gone pale with shock and disgust. "Walter, you're talking about deliberately abandoning children to die. That's not just cruel, that's murder, is it?" Walter asked with chilling calmness. "Or is it simply allowing nature to take its proper course? These children have no place in our world, Tom. They're living evidence of my sister's shameful choices, and their very existence threatens everything I've worked to build." "What exactly have you built that's so important?" Tom asked, his voice getting harder and more dangerous. Walter's face flushed with pride and arrogance. "I own over 400 acres of the finest farmland in the territory. I have contracts with the railroad worth thousands of dollars, business interests throughout the county, and plans to expand into cattle ranching on a massive scale. I'm going to be one of the most important and influential men in all of Nebraska." "Built on what foundation?" Tom pressed, his suspicions growing stronger. "Where did you get the money for all that land and those business deals?" "That's none of your concern." Walter snapped, his composure beginning to crack. "Actually, it is my concern," Tom said firmly, his hand moving closer to his rifle. "Because I've been investigating the cattle thefts around here for months, and I've discovered some very interesting evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Jim asked, suddenly paying closer attention to the conversation. "The kind that suggests our cattle thief isn't some wild Indian raiding party," Tom replied, his voice gaining strength and conviction. "It's someone who knows the local ranchers, intimately knows exactly which animals are most valuable, and knows how to move stolen cattle without being caught by the usual patrols." Walter's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. "You're talking complete nonsense, Tom. You're young and inexperienced, and you're letting your imagination run wild." "Am I?" Tom reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of leather and some papers. "I found this bridle leather near Henderson's place after his prize bull was killed. It has a very distinctive pattern of tooling. The exact same pattern as the bridle on your horse right there." The other men began to look at Walter with new suspicion and growing alarm. Cattle theft was a hanging offense in Nebraska territory, and the evidence Tom was presenting seemed quite damning. "And this," Tom continued, pulling out another piece of paper, "is a record of cattle sales at the railroad depot. Shows someone sold a prize bull matching Henderson's description just 2 days after the theft was reported." "This is completely ridiculous," Walter protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're going to believe some half-breed Indian sympathizer over a respected white businessman." "I'm going to believe the evidence," Tom said firmly. "And all the evidence points to you stealing cattle to finance your land speculation schemes. Then you tried to frame this old warrior to cover your tracks." One of the other men, Bill, who had been hanging back and looking increasingly uncomfortable, suddenly spoke up. "Walter, I've been thinking about what Tom's saying, and I remember something that bothered me at the time." "What?" Tom asked, encouraging him to continue. "Last week, right after Henderson's bull was killed, Walter showed up at the saloon in town with a thick roll of cash. Said he'd had an unexpectedly good harvest, but it's not harvest season and hasn't been for months. Walter's face went white as a sheet. That's pure coincidence and speculation. Is it? Bill asked, his voice getting stronger. Because I also remember you asking a lot of detailed questions about Henderson's operation, about how much his prize bull was worth, where he kept his best stock, what his security arrangements were like. I was just making friendly conversation. Walter protested weakly, but sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. You were gathering intelligence, Tom said bluntly. Information you used to plan and execute the theft of that bull, which you then butchered and sold for quick cash to fund your land deals. The circle of men was closing in on Walter now, their faces showing a mixture of anger, disgust, and grim determination. They had been hunting an innocent man while the real criminal stood among them, manipulating them all along. This is completely insane, Walter said, backing away from the group. You're all going to believe a savage and some half-breed children over me over a respected member of the community. We're going to believe the evidence, Tom replied coldly. And the evidence says you're a thief, a liar, and a man who would murder his own blood relatives to cover up his crimes. As the confrontation escalated, none of them noticed that the piece of paper from the hill had fallen from Wicasa's pocket during the fight. But Bill's sharp eyes caught sight of it, and he dismounted to pick it up and examine it more closely. Tom, you need to see this, Bill said, his voice filled with shock and anger. It's another letter, and it's got Walter's name all over it. Tom took the paper and read it quickly, his face growing darker with each word. This is a letter from the girl's mother to someone named Mrs. Howard. She's asking for help because Walter has been threatening to hurt the children if anyone learns about their father's heritage. Let me see that, Walter snarled, lunging for the letter. But Tom was faster and stronger, easily pushing Walter back. She says here that Walter hit her when she refused to hide the truth about her marriage. Left bruises on her arms and face. Why did you hit Mama? Ruth asked, her small voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Why did you hurt her when she was already sick? Because she was weak and foolish. Walter spat, his composure finally cracking completely. She brought shame on our family name with her disgusting marriage to a savage, and she refused to do what was necessary to protect our reputation. So you decided to solve the problem by letting her children die, Tom said with disgust. I decided to let nature take its course, Walter replied coldly. But this old fool interfered, and now I have to clean up the mess the hard way. Walter's hand moved to his pistol, but before he could draw it, the sound of more horses approaching at high speed interrupted the standoff. This time, it was a large group of riders, led by a middle-aged man in a rancher's clothes, who looked furious. There's the son of a bitch, the lead rider shouted as he approached. That's the bastard who stole my prize bull. Through Henderson, Tom called out. Perfect timing, we've got your cattle thief right here. Henderson dismounted quickly, his face red with anger. Walter Morrison, you lying piece of trash, I knew something was wrong when you started asking all those questions about my operation. E. Henderson. You don't understand the situation, Walter said desperately. These people are trying to frame me for something I didn't do. Like hell they are, Henderson replied. I found tracks around my corral the morning after the theft. Distinctive shoe pattern on the horse favoring the right front hoof. Same damn pattern as your horse right there. And I can prove the financial connection, Tom added. Henderson, what was your bull worth? $500, Henderson said promptly. Best breeding stock in the territory. And Walter, Tom said, turning to the increasingly desperate man. How much did you pay for that last piece of land you bought? Walter's face had gone completely white. I don't have to answer that, $500, Bill said suddenly. I was at the land office when he made the purchase, paid in cash all new bills. The evidence was overwhelming, and Walter knew it. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and he was willing to do anything to prevent complete ruin. You're all going to regret this, he snarled, drawing his pistol with desperate speed. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for. Don't do it, Walter, Tom warned, reaching for his own weapon, but Walter was beyond reason now. He pointed the gun at Wicasa first. You should have minded your own business, Savage. You should have let them die. No. Josie screamed, throwing herself between Walter and Wicasa. The gun went off with a deafening crack. The bullet struck the ground near Josie's feet, sending up a spray of dirt and small stones. In the chaos that followed, Ruth darted forward and bit Walter's gun hand as hard as she could, her small teeth drawing blood. Walter cursed and jerked his hand back, the pistol firing again wildly into the air. Tom used the distraction to tackle Walter, and the two men went down in a desperate struggle for control of the weapon. Get his gun, Tom shouted to the other men as he and Walter rolled on the ground. But as they fought, Walter's flailing hand knocked over a lantern that one of the men had been carrying. The burning oil spread quickly across the drought-dried grass, and within seconds, flames began to spread through the area with terrifying speed. Fire! Someone yelled in panic. The whole place is going up. The flames raced through the dry vegetation like a living thing driven by the prairie wind and fed by months of drought. The air quickly filled with choking smoke that made it difficult to see more than a few feet in any direction. We need to get out of here, Jim shouted over the growing roar of the fire. But Walter, despite his injuries from the fight with Tom, was crawling toward his dropped pistol with single-minded determination. His face was twisted with pain and rage, and his expensive clothes were torn and blackened with soot. I'm not finished with any of you, he snarled, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. I won't let you destroy everything I've built. The fire was spreading rapidly now, creating an ever-widening circle of flames around them. The smoke was getting thicker by the minute, making it hard to breathe or see clearly. Ruth began coughing violently, her small lungs unable to filter the toxic air effectively. Night this way, Wicasa shouted, leading them toward what appeared to be a gap in the flames. But as they approached, the wind shifted, and the fire flared up even higher, completely blocking their intended escape route. Now we're trapped, Josie cried, holding Ruth close as her sister's coughing got worse and more desperate. The smoke was becoming deadly now, and the intense heat was making it almost impossible to think clearly. Ruth's eyes suddenly rolled back in her head, and she collapsed unconscious in Josie's arms, overcome by the toxic fumes. Ruth, Josie screamed, shaking her sister desperately. Wake up, please wake up. Wicasa knelt beside the unconscious child, checking her pulse with practiced fingers. She still breathed, but need clean air very soon, or she'd die from smoke. The old warrior looked around desperately, his experienced eyes searching for any possible escape route through the wall of flames. Finally, he spotted a narrow gap between two burning bushes, barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through if they stayed very low to the ground. There, he said, pointing to the gap with obvious pain from his wounds. You can get through there, reach clean air and safety. What about you? Josie asked, though she already knew the answer from the look in his eyes. I too big to hurt, too old. Wicasa said gently but firmly. Gap only wide enough for children. But you small, you strong, you can make it to safety. I won't leave you. Josie protested, tears streaming down her smoke-stained face. We're family now. Yes, we are family. Wicasa agreed, his voice filled with love and fierce determination. And this what grandfathers do for granddaughters. We save them, even if it cost everything we have. But as Josie prepared to drag Ruth toward the narrow gap, Walter appeared through the smoke like a demon from hell, his pistol raised and his face twisted with desperate rage. Despite his injuries and the surrounding fire, he was still determined to silence the witnesses to his crimes. Nobody's leaving here alive. He wheezed, his voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. You've all heard too much, seen too much. This fire is going to solve all my problems at once. You're completely insane, Josie shouted over the noise. We'll all die if we stay here. Better than letting you destroy my life and everything I've worked for, Walter replied with chilling calmness. But before he could fire his weapon, Tom Bradley emerged from the smoke behind him, despite his own injuries from their earlier fight. Tom tackled Walter again, and the two men went down in another desperate struggle for control of the pistol. Run! Tom shouted to the girls through the smoke. Get out of here while you can. The fire was closing in from all sides now, and the smoke was becoming absolutely unbearable. Josie could barely see through her tears, and Ruth remained unconscious in her arms, her breathing becoming more labored with each passing second. I can't carry her anymore. Josie sobbed, her strength finally giving out. She's too heavy and I can't see where I'm going. Wicasa looked at the unconscious child, then at the growing wall of flames surrounding them. Making a decision that would cost him dearly, he gathered his remaining strength and lifted Ruth in his arms, despite his multiple wounds and the searing pain they caused. I make path for you, he said, his voice steady despite his obvious agony. Stay close behind me, hold onto my belt, stay low where air is cleaner. Using his rifle as a walking stick, Wicasa began to move through the smoke and flames toward the gap he had spotted. The fire was so intense now that it singed his hair and clothes, but he kept moving forward, driven by his absolute determination to save the children who had become his family. Stay with me, he called to Josie over the roar of the fire. Hold tight to my belt, not let go no matter what happened. They made it halfway to the gap when Walter's pistol went off again. The bullet struck Wicasa in the back, and he stumbled forward, nearly dropping Ruth in his arms. Grandfather. Josie screamed, her voice filled with anguish and terror. Keep moving. Wicasa gasped, blood spreading across his shirt, but his grip on Ruth never loosening. Almost there, cannot stop now. They reached the narrow gap just as Wicasa's strength began to fail him. He gently pushed Ruth through the opening first, then helped Josie squeeze through after her sister. Take her far from fire, he whispered, his voice growing weaker. Get help. Tell people. Tell them Wicasa Gray Bear die happy knowing his granddaughters live free. You're not going to die. Josie protested, but even as she spoke, she could see the light beginning to fade from his eyes. Take care of each other, Wicasa said softly. Remember, old man who love you. Be proud of who you are. Both sides make you strong. Behind them, the fire was consuming everything in its path. Tom and Walter were still fighting desperately, somewhere in the smoke, their struggle barely visible through the choking haze that filled the air. With tears streaming down her face, Josie dragged Ruth away from the fire and toward cleaner air. The little girl was still unconscious, but her breathing seemed to improve slightly once they were away from the worst of the smoke. More help, Josie screamed as loudly as she could, her voice carrying across the prairie. Somebody help us, please. Her desperate cries were answered by the sound of galloping horses approaching at full speed. A large group of riders was coming toward them, led by a woman in a dark dress who rode with the skill and confidence of someone who had been born in the saddle. Over here, Josie called out, waving her arms frantically to attract their attention. We need help. My sister won't wake up. The lead rider dismounted quickly and ran to where the girls lay on the ground, her movements showing the urgency of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. She was a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the strong, capable hands of someone who had spent her life caring for others. Are you Josie and Ruth Morrison? She asked urgently, immediately beginning to examine Ruth's condition. Yes. Josie sobbed, relief flooding through her at the sight of adult help. I'm Mrs. Elizabeth Howard, the woman said quickly, checking Ruth's pulse and breathing. I'm a midwife, and I received 2 letters from your mother before she died. She asked me to help you if anything happened to her, and she told me about your Uncle Walter's threats." 2 letters? Josie asked through her tears. Mrs. Howard pulled 2 folded papers from her coat pocket. "The first one told me about your heritage and asked me to care for you. The second one, which I received just before she died, told me about Walter's threats and his plan to abandon you." She was terrified of what he might do. Behind her came Sheriff Coleman and several armed townsmen, including Henderson, who had ridden ahead to get help when the fire started. They all looked grim as they surveyed the spreading fire and the chaos it had caused. "Where's Walter Morrison?" Sheriff Coleman demanded his hand on his weapon. "Still in there." Josie pointed toward the flames. "Fighting with Tom Bradley. And Grandfather Wicasa is trapped too. He saved us, but couldn't get out." Mrs. Howard was working frantically to revive Ruth, using water from her canteen and medical supplies from her bag. "This child has inhaled too much smoke," she said urgently. "She needs immediate medical attention." "What about the old Indian?" one of the townsmen asked. "He's not just any old Indian," Josie said fiercely, her voice gaining strength. "He's our grandfather, and he's been protecting us and taking care of us. He's the best man in the world, and he doesn't deserve to die." "We'll get him out," Sheriff Coleman promised. "The fire department is on its way from town." It took almost 2 hours before the volunteer fire brigade could contain the blaze enough to attempt any rescues. They found Tom Bradley first unconscious, but alive, his clothes singed and his face blackened with soot, but no serious burns. Walter Morrison was discovered nearby, badly burned, and barely conscious, still clutching his pistol in his hand. He was immediately placed under arrest, though his injuries were so severe that he required immediate medical attention. But it was Wicasa Gray Bear who captured everyone's attention and respect. They found him collapsed near the gap, where he had saved the children, his body bearing multiple bullet wounds and severe burns. Despite his terrible injuries, he was still alive, though barely. Tough old warrior. Mrs. Howard muttered as she began treating his injuries with the help of her medical supplies. Too stubborn to die when children still need him. Clutched in his hand was a small leather pouch that he had protected with his life. Inside were the wooden buffalo and eagle figures he'd been carving for the girls, along with a piece of birch bark covered with symbols and English words written in careful handwriting. "For my granddaughters, Josie and Ruth. Buffalo brings strength for hard days, eagle brings freedom for spirit to soar high. Old man loves you forever and always. Be proud of all you are, white mother's kindness, Lakota father's courage, both make you strong like the great oak tree with deep roots." Below the English words were symbols in the Lakota language, and Mrs. Howard asked one of the townsmen who spoke some Lakota to translate them. He wrote, "Takuwakan, Takuwakan." It means sacred, sacred. And this part says, "Mitakuye oyasin, all my relations." It's a way of saying that all living things are connected, that we are all family. Mrs. Howard read the message aloud to the girls, her voice breaking with emotion. "He wrote this for you, even when he thought he might not survive. Even in his darkest moment, he was thinking of you and your future." Ruth had regained consciousness by then, though she was still weak from smoke inhalation, and spoke in a whisper. "Is grandfather going to be okay?" "He's hurt very badly," Mrs. Howard said honestly. "But he's fighting with everything he has. He has something very important to live for now." The evidence against Walter Morrison was overwhelming and undeniable. The trial was held 6 weeks later on a crisp autumn day, when the cottonwood trees along the creek had turned golden and the prairie grass waved in the wind like an ocean of bronze and gold. The courthouse was packed with spectators as word of the case had spread throughout the territory and beyond. Judge Harrison, a stern man who had presided over the territorial court for over 20 years, listened carefully to all the testimony with obvious attention to detail. Tom Bradley, despite his injuries, gave compelling testimony about his investigation of the cattle thefts and Walter's attempts to frame Wicasa. "I found clear evidence of his guilt," he said firmly. The bridle leather, the suspicious timing of his sudden wealth, and his obvious knowledge of Henderson's operation all pointed to him. Bill testified about Walter's suspicious behavior and his sudden acquisition of large amounts of cash. He was asking too many questions about other people's livestock, and he always seemed to have money when the rest of us were struggling. Henderson provided the most damning testimony about the theft of his prize bull. "That animal was worth $500, and it was the foundation of my breeding program. The tracks around my corral matched Walter's horse exactly, and the timing of the theft coincided perfectly with his land purchase." Mrs. Howard presented both letters from the girl's mother, which detailed Walter's threats and her growing fear for her children's safety. She was terrified of what he might do. Mrs. Howard testified. She knew he valued his reputation and his money more than the lives of his own blood relatives. The girls themselves testified with remarkable composure for children who had been through such trauma. Josie spoke clearly about how Walter had abandoned them, while Ruth, despite her youth, provided details that corroborated every aspect of their story. "He said we were bad because our papa was Indian," Ruth said in her small, clear voice. "He said we made him ashamed, and he wished we would go away forever and never come back." When Walter's turn came to testify, he remained defiant and unrepentant to the very end. "I did what I thought was best for everyone involved," he said coldly. "Mixed-blood children have no place in civilized society. They're living reminders of the contamination of pure bloodlines." Judge Harrison's face showed his complete disgust. "Mr. Morrison, you have shown yourself to be a man completely without conscience, honor, or basic human decency. You abandoned innocent children to die stole from your neighbors to finance your greed, and attempted to murder those who stood in your way." The verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all charges. Walter Morrison was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison with all his property to be sold, and the proceeds used to pay restitution to his victims and to establish a trust fund for the girls' education and care. Meanwhile, Wicasa Gray Bear fought the longest and most difficult battle of his life in Mrs. Howard's house. The bullet wounds had become severely infected, causing weeks of high fever and delirium, during which he often spoke in Lakota about his deceased family members. "Oh, Winona, little one, grandfather is coming to see you soon," he would whisper during his fevered dreams. "But first must make sure new granddaughters are safe and happy." But it was the girl's constant presence and devoted care that ultimately made the difference in his recovery. They took turns sitting beside his bed day and night, reading to him from books Mrs. Howard had provided, telling him about their daily activities, and simply being there when he needed them most. "Why do you take care of old Indian?" he asked weakly during one of his lucid moments, his voice barely audible. "Because you're our grandfather," Josie said, simply adjusting his blankets with gentle hands. "That's what families do. They take care of each other, no matter what." When he was finally strong enough to sit up nearly a month after the fire, Wicasa asked to speak with Mrs. Howard privately about something that had been weighing on his mind. "I want to adopt them in white man's law," he said with quiet determination. "Make them my granddaughter's legal way, not just in heart were it already true." Mrs. Howard smiled through her tears of joy. "I was hoping you would say that. They've been asking about it constantly, and I think it's exactly what they need. They want old warrior for grandfather, even though I not share their blood." "They want you," she replied firmly, "because you chose to love them when their own blood relative chose to abandon them. That's what real family means." The custody hearing was held in late October, with the entire community turning out to witness the highly unusual proceedings. Judge Harrison, who had presided over Walter's trial, listened carefully to all the testimony with obvious interest and growing respect for the unusual family. Mrs. Howard spoke first and most eloquently. Your Honor, these children have endured more trauma and hardship than most adults face in an entire lifetime. They need stability, love, and protection above all else. Mr. Gray Bear has provided all of these things, nearly dying in the process of saving their lives. Tom Bradley, now fully recovered from his injuries, testified about Wicasa's character and actions. I've seen many men in my time, Your Honor, both good and bad. But I've never witnessed anyone show more courage, selflessness, or genuine love than this old warrior showed for these children. Even some of the men who had initially hunted Wicasa spoke on his behalf. We were completely wrong about him, Jim admitted with obvious embarrassment. He's a good man who was trying to help children in desperate need, and we nearly killed him for it. Henderson, the rancher, whose cattle had been stolen, also testified in support of the adoption. This man was innocent of any wrongdoing, and he suffered because of crimes committed by Walter Morrison. He deserves our respect and support, not our suspicion. Finally, Judge Harrison asked to speak with the girls alone to hear their wishes directly. What do you want to happen? He asked them in his private chambers. We want to stay with Grandfather Wicasa and Mrs. Howard. Josie said without the slightest hesitation. They're our real family now, and we love them more than anything. They saved us and loved us when nobody else wanted us. Ruth added with simple but profound truth. Even when we were dirty and scared and looked different from other people. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. I hereby grant custody of Josie and Ruth Morrison to Mrs. Elizabeth Howard and Mr. Wicasa Gray Bear, recognizing them as a legal family unit bound not by blood, but by choice, love, and mutual commitment. The courtroom erupted in sustained applause. For the first time in many months, the girls felt truly safe and secure about their future. That evening, as the newly legal family sat around their dinner table, Wicasa presented the girls with the wooden figures he had carved for them. The buffalo and eagle were beautifully detailed, smooth from hours of careful work despite his injuries. Buffalo for strength when worlds seemed too hard to bear, he explained, placing the wooden animal in Josie's hands. Eagle for freedom to choose your own path and soar above troubles, he said, giving Ruth the carved bird. But what about you, Grandfather? Ruth asked. Don't you need something too? The girls disappeared into the other room and returned with a wooden wolf they had carved together during his recovery, using skills he had taught them during their long hours together. Wolf for protection, Josie explained, presenting their gift. So you'll always remember that we'll protect you just like you protected us. Wicasa accepted the carved wolf with tears in his eyes, holding it as if it were made of precious gold. Most beautiful gift old man ever receive, he said softly. The years that followed brought remarkable changes to the entire community. Wicasa Gray Bear became a respected bridge between the white and Lakota worlds, teaching children at the local school about his people's culture, history, and traditions, while learning to read and write English with Mrs. Howard's patient help. The girls thrived under their new family's loving care and guidance. Josie discovered a natural talent for teaching and began helping younger children with their lessons, especially those from mixed heritage families who faced similar challenges to her own. When she was 15, she encountered a situation that would define her future career. A young boy named Tommy, who was half Lakota and half Irish, was being bullied mercilessly by other children because of his mixed heritage. This is Tommy O'Brien, Josie would explain to visitors to her classroom years later. His mother is Lakota and his father came from Ireland. He was having a very hard time until we organized games that brought all the children together and started teaching everyone some basic Lakota words. She had organized activities where children of all backgrounds could participate equally, and she began teaching simple Lakota phrases like wakan, sacred, and mitakuye o yasin. All my relations to help everyone understand that different cultures had wisdom to share. Ruth, always the more outgoing of the two sisters, showed a natural gift for bringing people together and mediating conflicts between different groups. When she was 17, she organized and led the first formal meeting between the Lakota Tribal Council and the town's governing body. "We're here to discuss fair access to the river for fishing and water rights," she explained to the assembled crowd, which included Chief Black Eagle and several other tribal leaders. "Both communities have legitimate needs, and we can find solutions that work for everyone if we approach this with open hearts and minds." The meeting resulted in a comprehensive treaty that established clear boundaries and shared resource agreements, becoming a model for other communities throughout the territory. The annual Gray Bear Day became the territory's most celebrated event, where people of all backgrounds came together to share food stories and friendship. The festival featured traditional Lakota dancing and storytelling, alongside American folk music and games. The feast always included both Lakota dishes like pemmican and wojapi berry pudding, and traditional American foods like apple pie and cornbread. The highlight of each celebration was a dramatic reenactment of the wolf rescue performed by local children who competed for the honor of playing the various roles. But perhaps the most meaningful changes were the quiet, everyday ones. Families who had once viewed Native Americans with suspicion and fear began to see them as neighbors and friends. Children who had been taught to fear differences learned to celebrate them instead. 5 years after their rescue, Josie stood before a packed schoolhouse as the featured speaker for Gray Bear Day. Now 12 years old and articulate far beyond her years, she spoke with the wisdom of someone who had survived great hardship and witnessed the transformative power of love. Wicasa Gray Bear taught us that family isn't about the color of your skin or where your ancestors came from, she said, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. It's about who stands with you when the world seems against you. It's about who shares their last piece of bread when you're hungry. It's about who risks everything they have, so you can live and be free. She paused, looking out at the faces before her former enemies, sitting side by side, children of different races, playing together adults who had learned to see past their fears and prejudices to the humanity in every person. "My sister and I are proud to be the daughters of a Lakota warrior and a white woman. We are proud to be the granddaughters of Gray Bear, and we are proud to be the daughters of Mrs. Howard, who showed us that love makes a family stronger than blood ever could." In the audience, Wicasa Gray Bear listened with tears of pride streaming down his weathered cheeks. Now in his 70s, he had lived to see his granddaughters grow into remarkable young women who honored both sides of their heritage while building bridges between communities. Beside him sat Mrs. Howard, now in her 60s, the three of them forming a family that had been forged not by blood, but by choice sacrifice and unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. After the ceremony, as the community gathered for the traditional feast and celebration, Mrs. Howard pulled out a surprise she had been saving for this special anniversary, a professional photograph of the three of them taken in front of their house. "For your children and grandchildren," she said, presenting copies to each girl. "So they'll always know the story of how love conquered fear, how courage triumphed over hatred, and how a family was born from the ashes of tragedy." That evening, as they sat around their dinner table for their traditional post-festival meal, Ruth asked a question that had been on her mind throughout the day. "Grandfather, do you ever wish things had been different? That we had met some other way, without all the pain and danger?" Wicasa looked at his granddaughters, Josie, now preparing for advanced studies to become a teacher, Ruth already showing signs of the skilled diplomat and peacemaker she would become, and smiled with deep contentment. "Every day, I thank the Great Spirit for the wolves that brought us together," he said with absolute sincerity. "You gave old man reason to live when he thought all reasons were gone forever. You brought light back to heart that had been dark for too many years. What happens now?" Josie asked, looking toward the future with anticipation rather than fear. "Now you fly like eagles. Wicasa replied, using the metaphor he had taught them years ago. You soar high above the troubles of this world, see far beyond the horizon, and help others find their way to peace and understanding. Mrs. Howard reached across the table to squeeze both girls' hands with obvious affection. And remember that this will always be your home, she said firmly, no matter how far you travel or what great things you accomplish in your lives. 10 years later, as Josie established the territory's first fully integrated school, and Ruth successfully negotiated a comprehensive and lasting peace treaty between local tribes and settler communities, their story continued to inspire people throughout the region and beyond. The wooden buffalo and eagle still occupied places of honor on the family mantelpiece, now joined by photographs, diplomas, awards, and mementos from their accomplished lives. The carved wolf the girls had made for Wicasa sat beside them, all three figures serving as reminders of the love that had brought them together and sustained them through every challenge. Visitors would often ask about the unusual family that lived in the big house on the edge of town, and the locals would tell them about the friendship between an elder Lakota warrior and two little girls that had changed everything in their community. The scars on Wicasa's hands from the fire had faded with time, but the love that had motivated his sacrifice remained as strong as ever. His bullet wounds had healed, though they sometimes ached when storms approached, reminding him of that terrible day when he had nearly lost the most precious things in his life. On quiet evenings, when 3 generations of their chosen family gathered around the fireplace, they would sometimes talk about that day when wolves had circled 2 frightened children on the prairie. But they always ended these conversations with gratitude for the courage that had brought them together, for the love that had sustained them through every hardship, and for the hope that their story would continue to inspire others long after they were gone. The friendship of an elder Lakota warrior and 2 little girls had indeed united a divided town, proving that the strongest bonds are often those we choose rather than those we inherit. Their story demonstrated that love knows no boundaries of race or blood, that courage can overcome any obstacle, and that even in the darkest times, hope and compassion can triumph over fear and hatred. Walter Morrison served his full sentence in the territorial prison, never expressing remorse for his actions. He died alone and forgotten, a bitter man who had chosen greed and prejudice over love and family. His name became synonymous with shame in the community, while Wicasa Gray Bear's name was spoken with reverence and respect. The trust fund established from Walter's confiscated property provided for the girls' education and helped other mixed heritage children throughout the territory. It became a lasting symbol of how justice could transform evil into good, and how the innocent could triumph over those who would harm them. As Josie and Ruth grew into accomplished women, they never forgot the lessons their grandfather had taught them. They carried his wisdom into their own work, helping other families bridge cultural divides and find common ground despite their differences. The annual Gray Bear Day celebrations continue to grow, eventually becoming a model for similar festivals throughout the American West. The story of the rescued children became a legend that was told and retold, inspiring countless others to look beyond surface differences and see the humanity in every person they met. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all, not just the saving of 2 children's lives, but the transformation of an entire community's understanding of what it means to be human, to be family, and to be truly free. In every act of kindness to a stranger, in every moment when we choose love over fear, in every time we extend our hand to someone different from ourselves, the spirit of Wicasa Gray Bear lives on, reminding us that the most powerful force in this world is not the thunder of guns or the weight of gold, but the simple, extraordinary courage of one human heart choosing to protect another.